Hey, greetings everybody, Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We left off in our journey through the novella of Blood and Honor with Tirion going back and introducing himself and really having a conversation with Eitrig, where he started to realize that not all orcs are bad. That does not sit right with his family and people that work for him back at the castle. So there's going to be some conflict there. Stay a while and listen to Chapter 4. This one's called The Chains of Command. And after this, we'll already be halfway done with this novella here. 2 days passed by quietly in Hearthglen. The rumors of the supposed orcish threat had died down significantly. Tirion felt relaxed and mused that he might even be able to put the whole matter behind him for good. So long as Eitrig stayed away from people, Tirion wouldn't have to worry about taking action and betraying his oath to the old orc. He was surprised to find that Bartholus had remained quiet about the issue for the past few days, yet despite the young paladin's silence, Tirion sensed that Bartholus wouldn't rest so long as he suspected there were orcs in Hearthglen. After his unexpected hiatus, Tirion slipped back into his role as the land's governor with relative ease. The somewhat monotonous bureaucratic duties of his office served to keep his mind off Eitrig and their fateful encounter. He spent what private time he could find with Talon and Karandra. Surprisingly, his wife seemed to have forgotten about their argument from the previous night. She acted as cheerful as she always had, and never once broached the subject of orcs again. Tirion was thankful for the peace and quiet. After the past week, he had had his fill of excitement and danger. The sun was centered in the crystal blue sky as Tirion sat on a large balcony overlooking the keep's stables and riding corral. Located at the rear of the keep's grounds, the balcony offered a breathtaking view of the mighty snow-capped Alterac peaks in the distance. He watched as far below him in the corral, Karandra led a small white pony around in circles. Upon the pony's back sat Talon, who was clearly having the time of his life. The laughing boy flailed his tiny arms gleefully, calling for his mother to go faster and faster. Karandra laughed with her son and kept reminding him to hold onto the pony's mane with both hands. Tirion gazed at them both intently. They were the center of his world and the source of all his joy. He would not fail them. He had thought long and hard about what Karandra had said to him during their heated argument. Perhaps his honor was a selfish thing after all, he mused. But even if it was an integral part of him. It defined him as clearly as his own face did. As a paladin, he could not and would not discard it out of hand. All depended on it. He simply hoped that it would never come between him and his loved ones again. Arden's heavy boots clanked loudly upon the balcony's stone floor. The captain of the guard strode up behind Tirion and bowed curtly. Tirion noticed that Arden was winded. Apparently the loyal captain had rushed to find him. Tirion stood up and saluted the younger man. He saw that Arden's face was drawn and pale. What is it, Arden? Why are you in such a hurry? The captain struggled to catch his breath.
I've been looking all over for you, my lord, Arden said in a raspy tone. We have visitors at the gate.
Tirion tensed. For a brief moment he feared the worst. Certainly visitors to the keep were common enough. The only thing Tirion imagined that would affect Arden so was an army of orcs scaling the walls.
What visitors? Is there a problem?
The paladin asked tightly. Arden shook his head and gulped air.
An envoy from Strathel, my lord. Lord Commander Dathrahan has come in person, escorted by a full regiment. He wishes to speak to you immediately.
Tyrion's jaw dropped. Lord Dathrahan here, he wondered. The Lord Commander was not only his direct superior, but one of his oldest friends as well. Dathrahan was a great leader and an honorable warrior. He and Tirion had saved each other's lives more than once during the war. Due to their increasing duties, the two friends hadn't seen each other in years. But why would the great lord venture all the way from the province's capital for an unannounced visit, escorted by so large a force? A burst of panic surged through Tyrion's body. Dathrahan knew about the orc. It was the only explanation for his visit, Tirion concluded. He knew that it must have been Bartholus who had alerted the Lord Commander to his recent encounter with Eitrig. Tirion inhaled deeply and steadied himself. He patted Arden reassuringly on the shoulder, and with a sidelong glance at his wife and son below, strode out toward the main gate. Lord Commander Saden Dathrahan was an imposing figure. He stood nearly 6.5 feet tall and was resplendent in his ornate shining armor. A gold-rimmed midnight blue cloak covered his broad shoulders and flowed out regally behind him. His aged features were marked by long years of battle and strife. His evenly cropped hair and neatly trimmed beard were gray, but his piercing blue eyes shone with a vigor and strength that belied his years. Yeah, I'm glad that he jumped to that conclusion right away, because that was my immediate thought. Upon seeing Tyrion's approach, Dathrahan's stern countenance broke and he smiled widely. He strode forward and embraced his friend in a bear hug. Tirion felt the air escape from his lungs. The mighty Dathrahan nearly lifted him from the floor. Dathrahan let out a deep, barrel-chested laugh.
Tirion, my friend, it's good to see you. How long has it been? 4 years?
Dathrahan asked. He released Tirion and the paladin straightened formally.
Almost 4 years exactly, my lord,
Tirion replied. Dathrahan smirked and slapped his back, nearly sending Tirion stumbling.
Let's not start with all that my lord rubbish. You're one of the few men alive who still remembers me as a snot-nosed whelp. We're on even ground here, you and I,
Dathrahan said humorously. Tirion forced himself to relax and smiled back. Have it your way then, Sidon. He slapped his hand on the taller man's shoulder plate. It's good to see you, too, he said warmly. Though Dathrahan's demeanor was as familiar and raucous as it had ever been, there was a light of concern in his sharp eyes. Tirion looked past his friend and saw row upon row of armored footmen standing on the plain beyond the keep's walls. His heart sank. Although he was glad to see his friend, Tirion knew that the presence of so many soldiers meant trouble. Tell me, Sidon, why didn't you inform me of your journey? I could have prepared a great feast had I known you were coming, Tirion said, trying to keep his voice open and friendly. Dathrahan nodded and spread his hands wide.
I apologize for the intrusion, Tirion, but we have urgent business to conduct. I felt I had to come and see you as soon as possible. But let's leave our business until later. You need time to gather your advisors for a meeting, he said in a more somber tone. Is there trouble, Sidon? Are we going to war? Tirion asked, not knowing what else to say. Dathrahan held him in his piercing gaze, studying his features. That's what I'm here to find out, Tirion,
he said at last. He does know about Atrigg, Tirion concluded.
For now, I'm anxious to meet your lovely bride and your son, Dathrahan said warmly. I regret that I couldn't visit and see the lad when he was born. You know how it is.
Tirion nodded. He's a good boy, a future paladin, he said assuredly. He felt beads of sweat forming on his brow. He tried to calm himself and behave naturally. He felt as if Dathrahan were looking right through him. He nearly jumped as Dathrahan belted out a hearty laugh.
Oh, that I have little doubt. I suspect that the Fordring line will always be there to defend Lordran and its people, Dathrahan said, smiling.
Tirion smiled back and nodded while saying, I certainly hope so. Hours later, Tyrion's advisors had gathered in the council room. A few of Dathrahan's senior lieutenants were present as well. Bartholus, who looked very excited by the new arrival, stood near the back of the room and remained silent. Lord Commander Dathrahan had taken a seat at the head of the table next to Tirion. There was a tension in the room as all present speculated on the urgent matter that Dathrahan had come to discuss.
Now then,
Dathrahan began, looking levelly at Tirion.
I've received news that there are orcs in Hearthglen. What exactly is the current situation? He asked.
Tirion swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. My lord, a few days ago, I had an encounter with an orc warrior, he said. Though I wounded it badly, I was knocked out before I could slay the creature. I returned to the spot where we battled in order to determine if the creature still lived, and to discern whether or not there are others of its kind within my borders. My findings led me to believe that it was an isolated incident, and that there were no other orcs accompanying it, Tirion finished. He was on dangerous ground. He had no wish to lie to his superior. Honor forbade it. Dathrahan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his bearded chin and pondering Tyrion's response.
And you conducted your investigation alone?
Dathrahan asked. Tirion nodded.
Yes, my lord. It is unfortunate you didn't have others with you to verify your findings, Tirion. Apparently your retainers don't share your optimistic appraisal of the situation, Dathrahan said grimly.
Tirion scowled. He didn't even have to look at the back of the room to see Bartholus' smug satisfaction.
Paladin Bartholus has sent me news of the affair. He seems to believe that the threat to these lands is far more dire than you do. I've come to find out for myself if this land is in peril, the Lord Commander said sternly.
Tirion then turned to stare at Bartholus' bemused face. He fought down his rage at the youth's audacity. He turned back to Dathrahan. Sidon, we've been friends for years. Surely you don't doubt my judgment in this matter. Honestly, young Bartholus' actions are a clear affront to my authority over this land. His zeal is commendable, but to worry you over such a minor matter is perplexing, to say the least. Dathrahan put his hand on Tyrion's arm to calm him.
Tirion, I've always trusted your judgment. I have never questioned your honor or authority, and I do not intend to start doing so now. Under normal circumstances, I would never intervene in a matter like this, but certain events have transpired that force me to look critically at any possible Orcish incursions.
Dathrahan leaned in and searched the eyes of the gathered advisors.
For some time we've been receiving reports that there is a new upstart war chief among the Orcs. Apparently this young Orc is intent on rallying the clans and reforming the Horde. Though they are few, his fanatical warriors have somehow overrun many of the guarded reserves and appear to be amassing stronger numbers. The alliance I command has deemed that we are in a state of emergency. I tell you all of this so that you understand my motives. There is any truth behind Bartholo's claims, and it is imperative that we prepare ourselves for war, he said grimly. The shocked advisors began to converse among themselves. Dathrahan turned to face Tirion. Old friend, with all due respect, I cannot rely on your instincts alone. This situation is far too volatile.
Tirion shook his head in disbelief. He braced himself for what he knew was coming next.
At first light, we will head out and scour the woodlands for more definitive proof of Orcish activity. Tirion, I want you to personally lead us to where you encountered the Orc. If the creature be found, we will take it back to Stratholm for interrogation, Dathrahan finished.
Tyrion's heart dropped. There was no way out now. He had been given a direct order. He would be forced to break his vow to Aetrig. As you wish, my lord, Tirion said in a strained voice. Dathrahan seemed content to let the matter rest. He dismissed the advisors and suggested that everyone prepare their men. Tirion stood to exit and saw Bartholus staring at him from the doorway. The young paladin's face was alight with victory. Tirion had to fight back the sudden urge to strangle the smirking youth. Without giving Bartholus a second glance, he left the room and made ready for the morning's expedition. Dawn had already bathed the land with its first rays as the force of knights and footmen made their way into the forested foothills. Tirion, Arden, and Dathrahan led the shining column down the dusty hunting path that snaked its way through the dense woods. Bartholus hung back behind them, preferring to converse with the veteran soldiers under Dathrahan's command. Clearly the young paladin was eager to prove himself in battle. Tirion was glad that the youth stayed away. He was disgusted with Bartholus and didn't even want to see his face. Tirion was in a grim mood. He had slept little during the night and woke with his guts tied in knots. He wished that he could somehow warn Aetrig so that the old Orc could evade capture, but Tirion knew that even if he could warn the Orc, his actions would betray his superior's direct order. He knew that there was no way to uphold his vow and do his duty at the same time. His precious honor was in great peril. They rode for hours up into the mountains as Tirion led the way. He knew exactly where he was going. Before long, the broken tower's remaining walls could be seen through the trees. Dathrahan leaned in and asked Tirion if it was the tower they sought. That is where I first encountered the Orc, my lord, Tirion said in a quiet voice. Dathrahan nodded, sensing Tyrion's apprehension. Are you certain, Tirion? You seem rather pensive this morning. I am certain, my lord, Tirion replied huskily. I'm fine. I'm just a tad tired, so. Dathrahan patted his shoulder reassuringly. The Lord Commander motioned for his men to take up positions along the road. He then called for a number of guards to come to the front of the column. Arden was among those who came forward. The captain smiled up at Tirion, but the paladin didn't feel like smiling at all. Tirion shuddered as two of the guards pulled a makeshift wagon cage behind them. The rickety cage was designed to hold and transport a small number of prisoners over long distances. He fervently hoped that it would stay empty. Dathrahan, feeling that stealth would be wise until they confirmed that there were numerous orcs in the area, ordered his men to remain behind as he and a small group moved in on the lonely tower. Bartholus, with a fiery enthusiasm, rode eagerly behind the Lord Commander. Tirion, Arden, and 6 footmen continued up the path after them. The clearing around the tower was quiet, but the footmen moved quietly enough despite their cumbersome armor and weapons. Following the instructions he had been given earlier, Arden commanded his guards to encircle the tower. Bartholus dismounted and retrieved his warhammer from its saddle loop. Escorted by 2 footmen, Bartholus cautiously made his way to the tower's entrance. Stopping a short distance from the ravaged entryway, Bartholus called out in his most authoritative voice. We come in the name of the Alliance. Come out from there and surrender yourselves, you foul beasts, or we'll be forced to kill you. His voice was edgy and quavered slightly. Tirion knew that the unseasoned paladin was quaking in his boots. Beads of sweat ran down Bartholus' scowling face. A shuffling noise came from the tower's ruined guard room. The two footmen near Barthelus braced themselves for an attack. Barthelus gripped his warhammer tightly, trying to keep his nerves in check. Slowly, the silhouette of a large orc emerged from the room's shadows and stood in the entranceway. Atric held his battle axe with both hands and looked ready to go down fighting. The orc scanned the human faces with furious eyes. He caught sight of Tirion sitting atop his horse, and he scowled deeply. Tyrion's eyes locked with the orc's for a moment, but he was forced to look away. The orc's disgusted gaze told Tirion everything he needed to know, that Atric thought his notion of honor was laughable. The old orc had saved his life, and he had repaid the debt by leading enemies straight to his home. Never in his life had Tirion felt such dejection and self-loathing. Atric took a couple of steps into the clearing. Tirion noticed that he was limping more than when he last saw him. The orc's wound must be badly infected, he thought. Atric's eyes blazed with hate and fury. Tirion could see that the orc would not allow himself to be taken alive. As if in response to his thought, Dathrahan spoke up. "I do not want the creature killed, I need him alive," he said. Barthelus took a quick moment to look back in dismay, but seemed to understand the order clearly enough. Arden and his guards converged on the tower, intending to aid in the orc's capture. Barthelus was so nervous his hands shook. He could feel the eyes of Dathrahan and Tirion upon him. This was the moment he had waited for. This was his moment of glory. With a strangled cry, Barthelus lunged at the orc, swinging his hammer, intent on delivering a killing blow to the orc regardless of what Dathrahan had asked. Surely no savage beast could match his light-born powers, he thought. Tirion winced as Atric adeptly blocked the young paladin's clumsy blow and slammed his stout fist into Barthelus's face. Panicking, Barthelus dropped his hammer as Atric kicked him squarely in the midsection. The young paladin, having had the wind knocked out of him, crashed to the ground and doubled over in a fetal position. Atric grunted derisively at Barthelus's weakness and ineptitude. The two footmen rushed at the orc, slashing wildly. Atric parried the first footman's attack and struck the second footman squarely in the chest, nearly cutting the warrior in half. The remaining footmen, seeing the orc's apparent savagery and skill, backed off a pace in horror. Arden and his guards, enraged by their comrade's swift death, rushed forward madly. Tirion saw that they would kill the orc if they could. "Don't kill him!" Tirion screamed frantically as the warriors descended upon the old orc. Dathrahan, sensing Tyrion's obvious concern for the creature, looked at his friend questioningly. "You seem very concerned for the orc's safety, Tirion," the Lord Commander said evenly. "This is just a routine capture. Are you all right?" Tirion gritted his teeth. He couldn't just sit there and watch the proud orc be cut down, but neither could he beg for the orc's release. To do so would brand him as a traitor. This was all his doing. Atric fought bravely against the footman, but he was easily outmaneuvered due to his wounded leg. The 6 footmen succeeded in pulling the mighty orc down to the ground. Arden smashed the orc's hand, and Atric loosed his hold on his axe. The warriors immediately began to beat the orc to within an inch of his life. Every fiber of Tyrion's body was ablaze with rage as he watched the footmen subdue the orc. He dismounted quickly and walked forward, intending to pull the footman away. As the footman pulled the bleeding orc to his feet, Tyrion's resolve to save the creature slipped, and he stopped. What was he thinking? He couldn't let this happen, but neither could he take up arms against his own men. His every muscle tensed as he stood undecided. With a loud moan, Barthelus raised himself up from the dirt. Arden helped him to stand and brushed him off. Barthelus, feeling deeply embarrassed and shamed before his superiors, rushed at the orc in a rage. Arden and Tirion both grabbed the young paladin's arms and restrained him. They exchanged knowing glances and held Barthelus until he calmed. "The bastard creature fought dishonorably!" Barthelus screamed. "He should be killed right here! Let me go!" He continued to strain against Tirion and Arden. "I have ordered that it remain alive, Barthelus," Dathrahan said. "Your wounded pride is not nearly as important as the information the creature may have. Restrain the beast," he ordered. Immediately a number of footmen appeared, pulling the wagon cage behind them. They took hold of Atric and threw him into the cage. Tirion turned to face Dathrahan. "My lord, surely this old orc is no threat to anyone," Tirion began. Dathrahan looked at him in amazement. "What is this, Tirion? Are you actually suggesting that we turn the beast loose?" Barthelus and Arden stared at him as well, both shocked by Tyrion's statement. Tirion turned back to gaze at the beaten orc. His face swollen and dripping blood, Atric stared straight back. "So much for your honor," the orc's gaze seemed to say. The footmen continued to beat and whip Atric through the cage's bars. They spit and hurled obscenities at the old orc. Tyrion's nerves finally snapped. He dashed forward and grabbed the guard who was whipping the orc. He grabbed the whip from the young man and began to lash him with it instead.
How does it feel?
Tirion shouted at the terrified guard who attempted to shield himself from the paladin's raging strikes. Datherhound looked on in unabashed disbelief. Arden felt the same. He rushed forward and grabbed his lord's arm.
Tirion, please, what are you doing?
Arden yelled. Tirion shrugged him off and stood to face Datherhound with the light of rage in his eyes.
The orc must be set free, he yelled. It is a matter of honor.
Tirion pushed Arden away and smashed at the cage's lock with the haft of the whip's long handle.
Tirion, have you taken leave of your senses?
Datherhound yelled in a deep voice. Barthas merely stood by, mouth agape. Tirion continued to smash at the lock. Shaking his head wearily, Datherhound ordered the footman to seize and restrain the raging paladin. Arden's troops grabbed hold of Tyrion's arms and wrestled him to the ground. Tirion fought with all of his strength, but the younger men easily overpowered him. Arden pleaded with him to submit.
My lord, please stop. What the hell is wrong with you?
He asked. After a brief struggle, the guards brought Tirion to his feet. The paladin looked at Atrigg and was met only with a blank stare in return.
Tirion, what the light's name has come over you? Your actions are treasonous. Tell me you have some explanation for all of this. Tell me you didn't just try to free this creature, Datherhound yelled.
Tirion attempted to compose himself.
This orc saved my life, Satan,
Tirion yelled.
During our battle, part of the tower's ceiling collapsed. I was left trapped and defenseless. The orc pulled me free before the entire roof came crashing down. I know it sounds impossible, but it happened.
Datherhound was stunned. Arden could only stare at his lord in shock. Certainly Tirion didn't really believe the orc had saved him, did he? He looked into his lord's eyes and knew that indeed he did.
I vowed to let him live in peace, and by my honor I will fight to see that he does.
Tirion renewed his struggle against the footman attempting to free his arms. Barthas seemed to come out of his momentary shock.
Traitor!
The young paladin screamed.
He is a traitor to the Alliance! He's been consorting with this beast all along!
Datherhound couldn't believe his ears. He had always known Tirion to be an honorable, level-headed man, but here he was defying his superior and siding with his mortal enemy all the same.
Tirion, I'm trying hard to be patient. Obviously, you're very confused about this creature. Regardless of what you believe happened, if you do not desist, I will be forced to have you arrested and placed on trial for treason. You will cease this senselessness at once.
Tirion persisted.
Damn it, Satan. This is a matter of honor. Don't you understand that?
He growled through clenched teeth.
I stand witness to his treachery, my lord,
Barthas said proudly to Datherhound. Obviously, the young paladin sought to make up for his defeat by endearing himself to the conflicted Lord Commander.
Shut up, Barthalis,
Datherhound growled. With a heavy heart, he motioned for the footman to subdue Tirion.
You leave me no choice here, Tirion. I hereby charge you with treason against the Alliance. Captain Arden, see that the prisoner is bound and placed upon his horse. He will be taken to Stratham along with this orc and put on trial.
Arden bowed his head in sorrow. Slowly he tied Tyrion's hands together and led him to his horse.
I am sorry, my lord,
Arden said, looking Tirion in the eye. Tirion frowned at his loyal servant.
It is I who am sorry, Arden. This is all my own doing. What I've done for honor's sake,
Tirion said softly. Arden shook his head questioningly.
Tirion, what honor is there in betrayal?
He asked in a whisper.
I'm a paladin of the light, Arden. You wouldn't understand.
Arden helped him up on his horse. Datherhound rode up to Tirion and stared at him.
I never thought I'd live to see the day,
the Lord Commander said. Tirion avoided his old friend's gaze. Datherhound, overcome by frustration and sorrow, angrily turned away and motioned for his troops to move out. Just feel like it's frustrating when you read a book and you see the protagonist and you're like, there's just so many better ways you could have handled this with just a little better communication. And all right, so looking grim. We are now halfway through this story, and we got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. I thank everybody so much for watching and listening, and I will see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.